I'm Kathy Millenay. Welcome to Nevada Newsmakers. President Reagan has called for a constitutional amendment that would allow voluntary prayer in public schools. So far, it has not met with success in Congress. The separation of church and state, the rights of believers and non-believers, that is the subject today. The amendment was defeated in the Senate. U.S. Senators for Nevada, Laxalt and Hecht, both voted for the amendment. It has not been before the House. However, Congressman Harry Reid has stated he would not have voted for the amendment. He believes that we should continue with the voluntary moment of silence that now exists in the state of Nevada. Congresswoman Barbara Vukanovich is a strong advocate for prayer in the schools. She participated in a prayer vigil at the Capitol recently. She has sent her thoughts to us about prayer from Washington, D.C.
Congressman Vukanovich, recently we witnessed an intense debate in the U.S. Senate over whether or not voluntary prayers should be allowed in our schools. Now, the Senate rejected that bill. Why didn't the House consider that measure?
That's an interesting question. The main reason they didn't was that the leadership of the House would not allow it to be brought up. And I'm speaking of Speaker Tip O'Neill and the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee under Congressman Peter Rodino.
But there was a high level of activity in the House during all of this debate. Part of that activity included a vigil. Can you tell us anything about that?
Yes, I participated. There were quite a few vigils going on that night in the House. I participated in the the one that was on the floor of the House. We had over 50 congressmen who were participating in that vigil, and we did keep the floor open, and we did discuss the issue all night long and talked about how important it was to the American people.
Those opposing the school prayer amendment, regardless of its wording, basically called the plan a violation of constitutional separation of church and state. Do you agree with that argument?
No, I don't think that is the issue. The issue is certainly the rights of people to be allowed to have prayer and to do this in a voluntary way. No one is prescribing what the prayer should be or any description of what it should be or what religion should be mandated under this amendment.
Now what happens? Is the issue going to go away, or is it here to stay? Or?
I certainly hope not. From what I understand, in both the House and the Senate, another bill is being introduced, and in the House of Representatives, it's being introduced in the Education Committee rather than the Liberal Judiciary Committee. And it would be called a bill Equal Access, and that would allow youngsters who were concerned about being able to hold meetings and just discuss religion, that they would be allowed to do it in school and not prevented, because you have Nazi groups who are able to hold meetings in schools, and yet children who want to talk about their religion are not allowed to do that.
Now, you were very active in the battle before. Will you be as active now?
Yes, I plan to be, and I hope we will have an opportunity to debate it before this year is over.
Thank you, Congressman Vukanovich.
With us today is Pastor Rob Owens with the University Family Fellowship, and Mr. Bob Pickering, who is the director of the Sierra Nevada chapter of the American Atheists. Our panelists today, Bill Feltner, who is a religious writer, and Judge Arthur D. Jackson from Dayton, Ohio. Judge Jackson is a municipal court judge and is a faculty coordinator at the Judicial College. Pastor Owens, over 20 years ago, Madeleine O'Hare initiated the U.S. Supreme Court case which reversed prayer being said in public schools. The President would like to change that. Would you?
Sure. I'd love to bring it back into a place where prayer is in public schools, just like Barbara Vukanovich.
Why?
I think the question is, why not? Our country needs all the help it can get, starting with school-age children. So anytime that we can begin to teach our kids to pray and call on someone other than themselves for strength and for guidance, it's a wise thing for our country to do.
Who's going to write the prayer?
That will be probably figured out in time. I doubt if any one person will ever just write the prayer. And I doubt if the prayer will be so religiously oriented that it will offend masses of people. But I believe that that isn't the issue of the prayer and who's going to write the prayer. It's if religious values are going to be allowed in public schools, or we're going to turn completely secular and humanistic and say we breed another kind of child who says there is no God, and we do not want to even talk about that kind of an opportunity.
Mr. Pickering?
A lot of things to say here. First, we have to decide which God we're going to worship if there's going to be any sort of prayer. And over time, there's been roughly 1 million different gods invented by mankind. And if there's going to be any prayer in the school, then every child has to have the right to say his prayer to whichever God he wants for whatever prayer he wants to say. And we could waste a tremendous amount of time in school just doing prayers. Another point that is very important here that the pastor brought up is that the guidance, the direction. We do need all the help we can get. And to say a prayer to a mythical God is not going to bring us any solutions. We need to realize that everything that we have today, everything from the wheel to the microchip, has been invented through human effort. These things weren't given to us as a result of prayer. And if we suggest to children by endorsing prayer in the public school, by orchestrating it, by setting aside time for it, that there is some efficacy to prayer, then we're essentially teaching them to take a placebo rather than looking for a real solution to their problems. So that's why I think that prayer doesn't belong in the public schools at all.
I have a question for you, Pastor Owens. I think it's interesting you indicated that you think we should teach our children, I guess basically moral values. Do you think that there is a responsibility for that teaching process in the home, in the church?
Oh, of course. I think that we have a problem today with the school prayer issue because we haven't done our job in the home and in the church.
Are we shifting the burden then from where it belongs, which would be the home and the church, into the school environment?
I think that we've so become out of kilter with what our founding fathers desired to base this country upon that now we're seeing one area and saying, gosh, we're missing it here. I think, of course, we're missing it if we're not teaching those moral values in the home as well as in the church, and the natural extension of that should be the schools, where we're allowing our kids to be programmed and taught different values. So I think we need to step way back and say, gosh, where's our country gone in its original conception and where it is today 200 years later? It's obvious that Jefferson, listen to this, if Jefferson was the president of the Washington, D.C. school district, the very first district, he put as a textbook the Bible for the only book to be read in the Washington district. He was the one with wall and separation, but he put the Bible and prayer and Watts hymnal as the three main things to guide children.
My other question, you referred to the prayer, which would be more or less a neutral prayer, something that would appeal to the different religions represented in the school system. How do we come up with a neutral prayer which addresses the spiritual needs of so many people without saying it's just a worthless statement of words?
I think that James Madison put it real good, that when he is called the founder of the Constitution, or the father of the Constitution, he said to give recognition to the deity of the Creator. And he left it at that there is a Creator and that we need to say thank you, and leave it at that. We don't have to define it as Christ. We don't have to define it any of these number of ways. Stick with the way they did it 200 years ago. Father, Creator, whoever you are, wherever you are, thank you.
Are we bound to offend some people just with that kind of neutral statement?
We're going to
Even
offend
those
people all the time, no matter what we do.
That's right. And I suppose with that in mind, would it be better to perhaps go along with this idea that Reagan has proposed, and that is the moments of silence?
I'm not opposed to the moment of silence at all.
And that way we get away from a prayer, a statement, an oral statement altogether.
A long time ago, I figured out that no matter what I did in life, I was going to offend somebody. Okay? And once I got that within me, I said, well, go for broke, because I'm going to offend somebody anyway. So if I'm going to offend somebody, I'd rather not offend God. And I'd rather try not to offend a whole bunch of folks. But I'm going to offend somebody, and this country is going to offend somebody. So you might as well get on with it and say, Creator, we worship you, we just pray to you, something, rather than going with what our mind in 1984 tells us, which is We don't have to worry about any outside thing. We're the center of our universe, and we just live for ourselves.
Of course, we have to rise above what your personal feeling is in terms of offending someone, because here we're talking about the government, be it the school system.
You bet.
Taking a position on a neutral prayer or a moment of silence.
Right.
And I think there's a little bit more to consider, don't you, than just whether I personally can accept the fact that I'll offend people.
One thing that I always find myself running up against is the personal offense versus the principle involved. And my opinions personally are not what matter. But if I'm going to continue to be an American by principle, and I'm going to continue to live by the Declaration of Independence and the preamble of the Constitution and the Constitution, I might as well stick with the original father's guidelines about the Creator. And my opinion doesn't really matter. Else I'm going to live in a foreign country.
You would do that.
Well, I've been to Russia, and I talked to a young communist student over there,
Actually,
and he told me
there's
about
no
how he was
such place as
indoctrinated.
Russia. There's a place called the Soviet Union. There hasn't been a Russia since early in this century.
Well, if you want, I'll tell you about the young communist student who told me in his schools that he was never told that there could be a God, there was never an opportunity to understand that, and he felt cheated.
I think that they'd be better off if they were free of being taught superstition in the public schools.
That's your opinion.
And if you want to go back to what the founding fathers said, you know, we have the actions of Reagan and Vukanovich and Jerry Falwell and Pat Boone all feeding us this stuff about what a Christian nation we should be here.
Or Madeleine Murray O'Hara feeding us this other stuff.
No, she just wants the government to stay out of religion.
No, she wants morality.
No, she does not want to do away with morality.
She'll tell you that. She's written that. Morality is not to be an absolute. That's why her life
No, I'm
portrays
afraid
that.
that's not correct. You should probably read what she says about her opinion rather than what her son Bill Murray says about her opinion.
I've read both.
But George Washington said that this country is in no sense founded on the Christian religion, and
But it is
Madison...
on God, on theism. That's
no,
why he
no,
declared...
it is not. There is no reference to God whatsoever in the
Then
Constitution.
why did he declare a day of thanksgiving, prayer and fasting, as a country? Why did he declare it as a national day?
Excuse me, does the presence of Thanksgiving mean that God is in the Constitution? I'm
It is if
afraid
he
not.
mentions theism, a deity.
Gentlemen,
there is no
I'm going...
reference to God in the Constitution.
No, not in the Constitution, but what
Thank
about
you.
the preamble to the
Gentlemen,
Constitution?
I'm going to have to interrupt. We're going to have to take a break, and we'll be right back.
Okay, I have a question for you, Mr. Pickering. I'd first of all like to read the proposed amendment that was just defeated. Nothing in this Constitution shall be construed to prohibit individual or group prayer in public schools or other public institutions. No person shall be required by the United States or by any state to participate in prayer. Neither the United States nor any state shall compose the words of any prayer to be said in the public schools. Now my question is, would such an amendment, in your opinion, violate the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, which says the government shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, and thus violate the separation of church and state? And why or why
Absolutely.
not?
That's why it would take an amendment to the Constitution to enact such a thing. If that were just a plain law, it could be enacted into law by simply a majority of the members of the Senate and the House with no ratification, and it would become law. The reason it has to be an amendment is because it does violate the principle of separation of state and church. But actually that's nothing new, because we have that all the time. We have the 1983 being proclaimed as the year of the Bible, you know, specifically proclaiming the Bible to be the Word of God. This is separation of state and church. Who are we kidding?
It all depends.
We have in God we trust on the money. We have one nation under God and the Pledge of Allegiance. Both of those things are relatively new. Those were done in the 60s and have been represented as if they had always been there, and Madison and Jefferson would have endorsed them. I'm afraid not.
I'm afraid they would have. It's obvious that they would have. It's obvious they would have.
Actually,
you know why?
Jefferson is the one who said that the Christian God is cruel, vindictive, capricious, and unjust, and I don't think he would have wanted that kind of endorsement there.
Then why did he go ahead and have the Bible instituted in the first public school district?
There weren't any public schools in those days.
When he established it, became the president of the Washington, D.C. School District School Board, why did he put the Bible in as mandatory reading?
Excuse me, we didn't have public schools in this country available to everyone like we do today until long after he was
Fine.
dead.
My point is principle. What in the world was Jefferson doing saying, wall and separation of church and state, but I want you kids to read the Bible because it's the essence of the foundation of
Are
your
you
learning?
referring to the Bible, the big thick one that everybody reads nowadays, or are we referring to the Jefferson Bible that took out all the miracles about Christ and all the baloney and actually amounted to 30 pages or something?
I'm talking about the deistic Bible that you're talking about. I don't care about you limiting to the big
deistic
Bible.
There is no deistic Bible.
Jefferson's Bible was a deistic Bible, but the question was religion. religion? And do we want to take 1984's definition of religion, or do we want to take that period of time's definition of religion? And you know, Bill, that they're different. Because religion today means something different than what it did then. Back then, the point of the matter was that religion was to define denominational pluralism. Religion was to be the broad spectrum within Christianity. It wasn't that all these other gods were floating around. They didn't have that problem back then. Okay?
Sure, we have that problem today. The Hindus believe in all kinds of gods today.
Fine. The point was, when they wrote the Constitution, they wrote the Constitution with the word religion there, and the First Amendment with religion in definition of that time and place. And you have to go back historically to find out what they were talking about, or else you're way off the wall when you define it from today.
Let me ask Mr. Pickering a further question. Mr. Pickering, a lot of times church opponents will argue that prohibiting any group expression of religions in the schools effectively puts the schools on the side of non-religion.
No, I think that's a lot of horse feathers, really. Students, anyone can pray at any time they want, any place they want. I think probably the height of absurdity is Barbara Vukanovich standing on the Capitol steps praying for the right to pray. It seems that if she's praying, she must have that right. In the public schools, we are supposed to be there just to teach, all that we can to our children about science, history, and so forth. And to teach any religion, other than in a comparative religions type of class, would be to favor that religion.
Wouldn't you say that secular humanism is a religion?
Absolutely not.
Why then did the Supreme Court declare it as a religion in Tosco versus Watkins?
Good for them.
They did.
The courts and
because
the
when you teach no
legislatures
religion,
can
it becomes a
declare
religion.
anything to be contrary to fact. It is not a religion. It has no God. It has no dogma. It has no ritual. It has no priests. It has none of these
Sure
things.
it does. It has priests.
No,
it has
doesn't.
priests, and we're the priests. Humanism says that we're the priests. The religion is that we worship
humanism
ourselves.
is not a religion, and
Yes,
there
it
are no
is.
priests.
Whenever you take away God, you end up with your own set of beliefs. Law is based on religion. Everything's based on a concept of some belief.
You miss entirely what atheism is.
No, atheism is foolishness, is what it is.
No, atheism. This is the usual thing. If you
I'm
can't
going
think
to
of
break
anything better to say, call a name.
Gentlemen,
No, not that. The Bible says, the man who
Gentlemen.
says there is no God is a fool.
we're going to take a break and we'll be right back.
I have a question for you. I can understand your opposition to any formal prayer process in the school. How do you react to the idea of the moment of silence for the purpose of maintaining decorum in the classroom?
There's no such thing as what you just described. The moment of silence.
Don't tell me there's no such thing. I'm
wait a
telling you that is a proposal which has been made.
Oh, okay.
I want you to react to that proposal.
Okay. What we have, there's two concepts of moment of silence. One is that it is truly for the purpose of promoting decorum. If that is really the purpose of the moment of silence, I want to know why we're discussing it here when the subject is school prayer. If the purpose of the moment of silence is prayer, then it's unconstitutional because we are setting aside time for the purpose of a religious activity. Now, in the state of Nevada, we have a moment of silence law. Recently, I dug up the legislative history, if you will, surrounding the passage of that law. It contained the comments of our state senators and legislators in committee and in open session of the two houses in discussing this amendment. It is absolute, in fact, the amendment started out as a moment of silence for the purpose of prayer. And after being discussed this way, they said, well, let's slip in this meditation and personal reflection baloney just as a red herring so the amendment will appear to have a secular purpose and appear to be constitutional in light of the Murray versus Collette decision. And that's a scam. We have that kind of law. There's, I believe, 21 other states that have similar laws. If you're talking about a law whose real purpose is prayer, it's unconstitutional. If it's just for a moment of silence, I think it's kind of a waste of time. But if it's really just, for, as you said, for decorum, we have no purpose in discussing it here because the subject here is state-church separation and religion, not a moment of silence for the purpose of promoting decorum.
Well, as you well know, I'm sure, that those who have been debating the issue of school prayer have suggested as an alternative the moment of silence. And there are those who suggest further that one of the advantages of the moment of silence is to give the children an opportunity to calm down and to begin the day of learning. Pastor Owens, how do you respond and how do you react to the idea of the moment of silence?
I think it's great. Anytime you give a chance for a child to either get quiet or pray, to reflect on his God, you can't lose.
I would like to say, Mr. Pickering, we are getting off into divergent subjects dealing with atheism and separation of church and state. But that is part of what this is all about.
Sure.
And I would like to ask you, since communism is atheistic in its philosophy, do you feel that this may be part of the reason for the constant conflict between the United States and Russia?
I think the myth that communism and atheism are one and the same is responsible for it, and I think Ronald Reagan and some of his new right cronies are doing their best to play up to that myth. Communism is an economic system. Democracy is a form of government, and atheism is an attitude toward life where you basically look at the evidence available and go only on those things for which you have evidence. You don't accept anything on faith. The fact that the Soviet Union, its leadership, endorses both the economic system of communism and the more or less totalitarian form of government that they've instituted, and atheism is an interesting coincidence, but they are not three identical things. And I wish to point out that there is no more totalitarian form of government than the Christian scheme of things, in which we have a God who does not answer to the wishes of the majority, is not subject to, we have no redress against this God. He is the ultimate commander. He makes the rules and we follow them. And this is the ultimate form of totalitarian government. And furthermore, it's the only government in, this government by God is the only government known to man in which those who break the rules are tortured endlessly. No other religion has that feature.
Mr. Pickering?
Excuse me, we're going to have to take a break and we'll be back right after this. Pastor, would you like to respond?
Gosh, thanks. It's really easy to give out that intellectual dialogue about atheism being separate than communism and economics and whatnot. That thing's garbage. I've been to Russia and I've talked to communist students. Romania, Czechoslovakia, Hungary. I spent time over there.
Russia since 1917.
I've been to the Soviet Union. I've been there and I've talked with those students. You know what? They're crying out for some existence besides themselves. And for them to be denied the opportunity to get to know that there's a possibility that there's something other than that is torture. Is torture because man's stuck with himself. And there's nowhere to look but himself. And in that there's real problems. You see? And so when you say, well, atheism is different, it's just a coincidence they happen to grapple together. Well, I tell you what, rebellion in man's soul always runs together. Whether it's economics or it's religious sacredness or whatever it is, it always comes together as one big front that says, man is the center, take away morality, take away absolutes, we'll do our own thing. And we'll chuck religion because religion stands above our concept of God and us being the gods.
Well, considering that religion brought us the Crusades and the Inquisition, and God allegedly murdered the entire human race with that great flood except for one drunk and his family, and the Bible was used to justify slavery, and the Bible is being used today to justify the defeat of the ERA and to
If the Bible was justified for slavery,
to keep women.
What was the Civil War about? What was the Industrial Revolution over there in England about?
Excuse me, but the Bible was used substantially to justify slavery. It's
Man
being
is always
used
trying to
today.
manipulate the Bible to his own desires.
Thank you.
Right?
I'm glad you said that.
It is true. It is true, but the key is that the Bible has the absolutes of love thy neighbor as thyself, don't keep them in
Love thy
slavery.
neighbor as thyself. I believe in Luke 14:26, Jesus says that you have to hate your mother, father, sister, brother, wife, and yes, even yourself to be his disciple. I think I, as a human being, can do much better than Jesus when it comes to that sort of thing.
If you want to interpret the Bible, ask an atheist. He knows.
All I'm doing is quoting it. I'm not interpreting.
Well, then read the scriptures in context of the passage. Don't be foolish enough to pull one out and say, see this? Judas went and hanged himself. Go and do ye likewise. You know, that's really stupid.
I'm just quoting what Christ says you have to do to be his disciple.
That's it, gentlemen. I am sorry, our time is up. With us today has been Mr. Bob Pickering, American atheist, Pastor Rob Owens, University Family Fellowship, and panelists Bill Feltner, religious writer, Judge Arthur Jackson from Dayton, Ohio. This is Kathy Millenay. See you next week on Nevada Newsmakers.